Hampshire. I'm down here in Manchester at the Public Access TV studios. This is my show, the Jon Kiper Show. Welcome, thank you. We're talking about all sorts of different political issues and all sorts of issues that are affecting New Hampshire. And one thing that I keep talking about with my campaign for governor is housing. And I really see housing as just the cornerstone of civilization. You know, it's really the backbone of our society, and it's so important that we have more housing. And really, we've got this problem right now where we need housing, and we can't seem to build it fast enough. And one of the reasons we can't seem to build it fast enough is because of the way our planning and zoning laws are set up, which is really a slow process and has really hindered the ability for developers to really work within in towns and cities to develop the land and into the housing that we actually really urgently need. So my guest for today is former state representative from Peterborough, Ivy Vann. And Ivy has been working with my local town of Newmarket to develop and work on some of our planning and zoning laws, to update them. And maybe you could talk a little bit about your background. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, no, I'm delighted. There's nothing I'd rather talk about than housing policy. Well, this is probably my fourth career. I taught school for a while. I went to seminary. I was a newspaper reporter and editor. And about 20 years ago, I'd always been interested in the built environment. And of course, as a newspaper person in southern New Hampshire, I worked for the Milford Cabinet for about 10 years in the 1980s into the mid-90s. I covered the planning board. So I watched towns essentially zone themselves out of existence. Everyone was worried that, oh my gosh, we don't want to be Salem. God forbid that we should become Nashua. And if we allow housing, we're going to have all these children in our schools. And, oh, we need to enact zoning that is going to prevent that from happening. So they did. And one of my favorite examples is a small town in southern New Hampshire, which shall, for this purpose, remain nameless. I watched them enact zoning where they enacted 3, 5, and 7 acre zoning. You had to have a minimum of 3 acres, 5 acres, or 7 acres, depending on where you were. And in their village, which was quite beautiful then and still beautiful now, they enacted similar rules that didn't reflect anything about what was actually on the ground in town. So what it meant was that if their village burned down, you could not have rebuilt it. And it also meant that it was very hard for people who lived there to build a garage because all the lots were smaller than the new rules said they ought to be. So I've been interested in this for a really long time. So 20 years ago, my husband and I and our 4 kids were living in Peterborough and trying to figure out, we'd sold a house in Temple, we're living in a rented house, and a piece of land fell in my lap. And I thought, now's my chance to put my mouth where, put my land where my mouth has been all these years. So we investigated the possibility of building a neighborhood. And I ran smack up against the fact that even though the master plan, as most master plans do, talked about walkability and connection and preserving the environment, the code required a minimum of an acre lot. And you can't build a neighborhood with a minimum of an acre lot. So I kind of backed into doing this professionally over the intervening 20 years. And now I am a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners, which makes me really fancy. And I'm a Congress for the New Urbanism accredited planner. And don't panic, urban just means more than 2 buildings next to each other. It doesn't mean Manhattan. So yeah, that's how I got to be here. And over the last almost 18 months now, I've been doing a lot of work for a lot of small towns in New Hampshire using funds that came from the Housing Opportunity Planning Grant Fund that's being administered by the New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority and Plan New Hampshire. So I've been working with towns we look to see what's the current state of your housing? So, do you have housing at all price points? Do you have housing that fits all kinds of families? Pro tip, the answer is no. And then we look at the code that they're using. Does your code further any of those aims? I'll let you guess what the answer is there. And so the goal is to persuade towns to make accommodation to allow what we call missing middle housing, duplexes, triples, quads, dignified small apartment buildings. We're not talking about 40-unit LIHTC buildings. We're talking about the kind of multifamily that we've always had in New England. I mean, the triple-decker has been an iconic New England multifamily style for 150 years.
Yeah.
Until it was made illegal, by the way. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
Yes. Oh, yeah. This is a great story. So the triple-decker was being built in Worcester and Boston and in Rhode Island and in Manchester. And
so that's just any 3-story apartment building?
Yeah, it's a 3-story. It's a 3-flat. So what it typically is they're kind of square. They often have a turret on the core. Not really a turret, but kind of a bay window on the corner that goes all the way up. They have a little porch, and then in the back there's a set of porches where the outside stair goes up. You've seen them everywhere. Manchester has a bunch. So Newmarket has some, not very many because of the way that the mill housing was different in Newmarket. But anyway, so the triple-decker was being built by Irish immigrants and Italian immigrants, and it was a way for immigrant families to get a rung in on the economic ladder, because in the United States, real estate is where the money is, and it's how families accrue money is through owning a building. So all of these immigrants were building these, and we're just going to call them the NIMBYs of the 1890s and 2010 and the 1910s, didn't really like it. They didn't like the way they looked, and they didn't like the people who lived there. And so what they did was, this was right when zoning and regulation about building was beginning to be a big national thing. So they actually used fire code to suppress the construction of new triple-deckers. They said, oh, well, they're dangerous. And we can't have people having a cook stove on the 2nd floor because that is dangerous. And God forbid you have one on the 3rd floor. So those buildings became illegal to build any more of. We have a big stock of them, thank goodness, because we'd be in worse shape than we are now if we didn't. But it's a great example of how, back to what I said about the little town that I used to watch, how we used not really relevant worries to make it harder to build housing. And we're right back there now.
Yeah, that's really interesting about the fire codes, because I find sometimes with environmental issues and also fire safety stuff, it's really hard to tell what's being put in there for the right reasons and what's being put in there just because it's a really easy way to block a project or limit growth.
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. And there was a great piece in the New York Times, I think day before yesterday, that I shared on my Facebook page with a gift link, even though I'm always angry with the Times. Every once in a while they publish something and I'm like, okay, I'm still mad at you, but I want people to know this. So it was an op-ed about why elevators are so expensive.
Oh, I read this.
Yeah. Right? And did you go and look at the building code? It was written by a guy who started a nonprofit that actually looks at that very question about building codes.
Yeah.
Do building codes actually further health and safety, or are they protectionist for a whole lot of different reasons? And the answer is, in a lot of cases, they're protectionist.
Yeah, that's a really interesting article. And basically the thesis of the article was that we have regulated elevators so much that a lot of times it's not cost effective to build them because they have to be so big. So instead of having elevators in some of these 5-story buildings, they just have stairs.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny because people say, well, they should, so the argument is that the elevator should be big enough to fit a gurney, or right. Someone's having a medical emergency, the EMTs can get in there with the gurney. The problem is that it doesn't say that they have to, that they have to put in an elevator. They can just not put one in.
Right.
So the EMTs just end up having to take the stairs.
Yeah,
so
just
it's not
like they
exactly
would if the elevator were there and smaller.
slightly smaller and,
Yes,
and an affordable
exactly.
price. So
Yeah.
I think that was a really good example. I actually posted that article on my TikTok and got some of the most likes I've ever gotten. I was really surprised, and the
Yeah.
most comments. It was very heated debate about elevators, but it's just a really good example of how sometimes the code sort of gets out of control, and then suddenly we can't really build anything.
Yeah, I think that's a fair thing, and that's true. I mean, in terms of like lot size,
Yeah.
people will say, "Oh, well, we have to have a 2-acre lot because if you have water, if you don't have municipal water and sewer, you have to have a 2-acre lot to accommodate a well and septic." Well, that's actually not true, and the DES will tell you that it's not true. It's about 30,000 square feet for most soil types. I mean, if you are all granite, then clearly it's not going to be that. But for most soil types, 2/3 of an acre or 3/4 of an acre, I guess, is enough
Yeah.
for water and sewer. And while I would like to see, I mean, that's hard to build a walkable neighborhood with 3/4 of an acre, but it isn't as much as 2 acres.
Yeah.
And there's a financial implication for the town. I mean, I've talked about this in the past. When somebody puts in a subdivision and builds a new road and turns the road over to the town is like, "Oh, look, we got a road and we didn't have to pay for it." Yeah, but now you have to maintain that road, and eventually you're going to have to replace it.
Yeah.
And it costs about $5 a running foot to salt, sand, plow, ditch, and mow 1 foot of paved road in New England every year in perpetuity.
Yeah.
So when you require 200 feet of frontage, you're indebting the town for about $1,000. Okay, so there's a house across the street, it's only $500. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And that does not pay for repaving.
Yeah.
And if that road's a cul-de-sac, it is not contributing anything to the town in terms of connectivity and added safety benefit of connectivity. It's a driveway. It's a glorified driveway. But we've made these choices because they seemed like a good idea at the time. And when I watched The Nameless Town that I spoke about earlier doing this, I could see why they thought it was a good idea.
Yeah.
And while I didn't have the language at the time to say, "Hey, wait a minute, I think this is a problem," I had the sense that it was going to be a problem. And now I have the language for why you don't want to do that.
Yeah. Now you're working with my hometown, Newmarket, redoing some of our zoning
Yeah.
and ordinances. Could you explain a little bit what you're doing there and how that could work maybe in other towns in New
Sure.
Hampshire?
Oh my God, Newmarket has been just a delight to work with. I have to tell you that your planner is one of my favorite people, and
Shout out to Bart.
yeah, Bart's all that.
He's the Newmarket planner.
Yeah, he's terrific, Bart McDonough. So what I'm doing in Newmarket is I'm writing new code for 2 parts of Newmarket. I'm writing new code for the Main Street 108 spine, and what we're proposing is code that between the Durham Town line and the car wash, which is not all the way to the Newfields Town line, but between that area, we're writing code that's when things are developed or redeveloped in that stretch, we want them to look like what Newmarket already looks like. Newmarket has a great little solid small town main street with short frontages, all kinds of buildings, not the mills are big, but across the street from the mills, you've got a bunch of little buildings. I mean, how wide is your building? 25 feet
not
maybe?
Even. I think it's 17, I think, on the inside.
Yeah, something like that. So we want that kind of building to be able to be built because that's what makes a lively downtown. So I'm using, and then the other place we're looking at are the close-in neighborhoods because we want those to, as they gradually change over time, we want them to develop in a small town fashion, not in a suburban fashion. We don't want big lots. We don't want long frontages. We want to be able to keep making what you've already got, for example, up in the New Village, where you have, I think the frontages are maybe 65 feet, something like that.
Yeah.
So we're writing code that incorporates the rules incorporate what you already have.
Yeah.
And I use a technique called form-based code, which sounds really complicated, but all it really means is these are the kind of buildings we want. So I have these little cards and I give them to people and I say, okay, sort these cards. Tell me which one of these buildings you think would be okay in Newmarket. And people make a pile. Yes, these would be okay. No, these would not be okay. A lot of people put all the cards I give them in the yes pile because I try to only give them cards that represent buildings that you already have.
Right.
So, and then we write rules that say, okay, in this neighborhood, you can build any one of these buildings, and what it doesn't tell you what they have to look like. It tells you how wide they are, how tall they are, where the front door is, how deep they are, how many units you can put in it, and where you have to put the parking. That's it.
So that makes it easier for developers because they know straight ahead what's possible. They don't have to go to the Zoning Board of Adjustment for every change.
Exactly. If they want to do something besides what's allowed, that avenue is available to them. You're not required to do this. But if you want the easy path, this is the easy path. Form-based code is great for everybody because it gives the neighborhood and the residents of a town certainty about what can happen.
Yeah.
So you're not always worried when you hear, oh my God, they're going to build something. You're not immediately thinking it's going to be terrible.
Yeah.
And it's great for the developer because, as you say, it gives you a path forward. It gives you certainty. And time is money for a developer. If I've bought a parcel of land, I'm paying for that land. I probably borrowed money.
Yeah.
I'm paying interest on that land. So making the process take longer may just plain kill the project.
Right.
And it's great for the town because it cuts down on conflict, it smooths the path, it makes everything easier for everyone.
Yeah.
I love form-based code. I'm
Yeah.
a total fanatic about it. I'd love to do it more places. I mean, Newmarket's the first place that's asked me to do it in New Hampshire, and I'm thrilled.
Do you think that form-based code is a good way to combat NIMBYism? And if you don't want to know what NIMBYism means, it's an acronym for not in my backyard, and it's people that generally just don't want any new building basically anywhere
Build
around
absolutely
them.
nothing near anybody banana. The banana is the result of NIMBYism. I do think that form-based code and building types, which are part of form-based code, I do think that they are helpful. I think NIMBYism, though, I think it's a really deep-seated problem. And part of the problem with the balance of housing is that we want housing to do two things in the United States, and they're, I'm sorry, incompatible. One of them is we want them to be a repository of economic worth for the owner. We want them to appreciate in value. We want them to be a source of funds in the form of a loan. You can put your house up to get a loan. We expect them to increase in value every year in a steady way. And when it doesn't happen, when we have a giant housing crash, which we've had at least twice in my lifetime, and I'm old, but not that old, maybe 3 times. In any case, so we want that. And, you know, my house is worth more every year, and that makes me feel safe. But the other thing we want is we want everyone to have a place to live, which implies that we have enough housing. And if we have enough housing, then we have enough of a supply so that that gradual increase in value, it's not going to be stopped, but it's not going to be as great.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen housing prices increase by, what, 150%?
Yeah.
And that's because there's not enough.
Yeah. What do you say to people, you know, one kind of irony I find is that, you know, we just did the reassessment of Newmarket.
Right.
So everyone's properties are you know, doubling practically in price. I mean, my building almost doubled. And people are freaking out because they don't really exactly understand how the price, the tax is going to come down.
Yeah, taxes may well come down because you're taxing on a larger pool.
It is kind of funny to me because, you know, I just want to say, you know, the longer we don't build more housing or build little housing, you know, we're just limiting the supply, so it's going to make the current supply just more and more and more valuable. which might be good if you're already in there,
but it's
really bad if you're not.
And it makes it really hard to get in. Yeah, that's a huge problem. The other thing is we're not building the right things. We have, over the last 75 years, through government policy, through local town policy, through lending policy, through all of those things, we've privileged two kinds of housing and two kinds only. Big single-family houses on big lots, garden apartments out by the highway, if you get that. I mean, you might not even get that. You might only get this. And so one thing to remember is that big single-family house on a big lot, first of all, it's the most expensive form of housing to build, maintain. And it also doesn't work for everybody. 30% of all households in the United States and in Newmarket are one-person households.
Yeah.
One person, one. Another 30% are two-person households. So 60% of our population is one or two people living in a house. So what we have all across New England is we have a little old lady living in a house that's way too big for her. She can't keep paint on it. She can barely pay the taxes on it. And she can't sell it because there's no place for her to go.
Yeah.
She wants to stay in her town. She wants to live in a little cottage in her town. That little cottage does not exist because we haven't allowed it to be built.
So is that really how we get, because I mean, the way I look at it is, I think it's important for people to understand, we don't need to build infinite housing forever. We need to get through like the next 10 to 20 years and basically help the baby boomers get out of their big houses into smaller townhouses, condos, senior assisted living facilities.
Cottages, cottage courts. Everybody loves a cottage court.
Cottage court.
Yeah, let's have a cottage court.
Will you describe that?
Yeah, sure. So a cottage court is what everyone loves them. So if you think about the movie Chinatown, there's a moment where Jake goes to this little place where it has like, I think there are maybe 8 little Spanish revival cottages, stucco cottages, all right close together on a single lot. That's a cottage court.
So how many square feet would a cottage be?
The cottage could be anywhere from 500 to maybe not more than 1,200 square feet. So they're small houses. I have a friend who built a bunch in Doe Mill, which is a development in Chico, California. He said that every time he built a cottage court, that the people who bought them were single divorced women in their 50s. You know, they work for a lot of people. So, but they're very hard to build in our current climate because if we require an acre for a parcel for a building, you can't build a cottage court. The point of a cottage court is you're putting 6 small units on a lot that might only, under your current rules, only accommodate one big single family house.
Yeah. Could you put those type of cottages in a municipality that didn't have municipal water and sewer?
Absolutely.
There would be a way to do it.
Oh yeah, there's one of my favorite examples is in Bristol, Vermont. There's a cluster of duplexes and single family houses, some cottages around a big green. It's right behind the Shaw's Market in downtown Bristol, Vermont. It's cute as a button. And the septic is in the green.
Perfect.
So they've ganged their septic. They might have town water, or if they don't, they have a shared well.
Yeah.
And you can share up to, I think, I'm probably going to get this wrong, there's a number, you can share up to around 20 households on a well without becoming a municipal water source.
Wow.
So yes, absolutely.
So you can do these little smaller setups.
Absolutely, you can do that.
Because wastewater treatment and water in general are two big obstacles, which, you know, I go to some of the towns and talk about all this housing stuff, and they'll say, oh, well, you know, we don't have the wastewater treatment plant. And it's kind of like, oh, if we don't invest in this infrastructure, we also don't have to worry about housing anyone extra, sort of.
Yeah, and I will tell you that I have heard people from towns, which will remain nameless, say, well, you know, when we put in our municipal system, it's only in the downtown, and we kind of deliberately undersized it because we didn't want to have growth.
Yeah.
And I want to say one more thing, that one of the things that I run up against a lot is people will say to me, well, okay, so we let you build some stuff. It's all going to be too expensive for everyone.
Yeah.
Market rate housing is not the enemy. Market rate housing is not the enemy. If you have a desirable place that people want to come to and they sold a big house in New Jersey and they're moving here and you don't have market rate housing for them, they're going to buy an existing building, and because they have that big basket of money they need to spend, they're going to outbid anybody local, and they're going to buy it, and they're going to pour a mort of money into it, and now it's an expensive house.
Yeah.
Market rate housing makes everything better for everyone. Now, I think I told you about that great study that was done first in Finland and then replicated in the US, where 500 units of new market rate housing, within 6 months, you see people moving in the lowest quartile neighborhoods.
Yeah.
It's a knock-on effect.
And it's just about fluidity in the housing market. And that's
absolutely.
why, you know, if you see luxury condos going up, you say, oh, that's all they're building. You know, that's not helping. It is helping. It took me a while to wrap my head around this. And probably, I'm sure people really struggle with this concept.
People struggle with this
But
a
even,
lot.
you know, building housing at the top creates fluidity in the market.
That's
and
right.
that's really what we need.
Right. Well, think about that old lady in her big house.
Yeah.
So she sells it. Now she has a pot of money. She can actually buy one of those fancy condos, move into it with her little yappy dog.
Yeah.
And that is a win.
Yeah.
That's a win.
Yeah.
No. It's right now, I think of the housing market as like a dance. It's like musical chairs is the great example. Right now, we don't have enough chairs.
Right.
So adding chairs makes everything better for everyone.
Yeah. Is there any one or two last things that you think everyone in New Hampshire should understand about housing that they don't understand right now?
That it's really difficult to change local zoning code to allow more housing.
Yeah.
And there's nothing in it for the towns and a lot of reasons not to do it. I am sympathetic to how hard it is to do that. I think it's going to take a state mandate, which has been true in California and Washington State and Oregon. It's been true in Minneapolis, St. Paul. It's been true a lot of places.
Yeah.
And people don't like it, but it's important.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on. This is a great discussion, and I hope that people learn something about housing in New Hampshire. And you know, there are still some funds left, I believe, in the HOP funds.
There are HOP funds.
If your
still
town needs some help.
Yes, you can. There's going to be a how to apply for HOP funds webinar. If you go to the State Office of Planning and Development, you can sign up for that. There's funds available to do this kind of work, and a big part of the work is talking to the people in your town and talking about all these things, why this is important and why allowing more housing is not the end of the world, but in fact, the beginning of a great new dawn.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.